Welcome to the Small Giants Fishbowl. This topic is how to use feedback to bring your company values to life. In this fishbowl, you'll learn from Jonathan Raymond, author of Good Authority and CEO at Refound, on how to give feedback in a way that feels natural, acknowledges power imbalances, and brings your company values to life. Okay, here we go.
Thanks, Rachel, Jillian. Thanks, everybody from your team for setting this up and making it easy. Really appreciate that. What I'm going to do today for the next hour, we'll see exactly kind of how it will definitely be less than 1 hour. I want to see if we can sort of toggle between presenting and just having a conversation around a difficult topic. So I've got a deck here. I'll share my screen in a minute. It'll probably make all the videos really small, but we'll bounce back and forth. I just want to make sure that we cover the ground in terms of hopefully sharing a new idea with everybody here, but also giving an opportunity to have some discussion and conversation about it, because there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to obviously feedback and people management. So let me just do that, start here. When I think about accountability, I think about love. I think about caring for people, helping them see the ways that they're getting in their own way, personally, professionally, as an organization. I maybe had met some of you in Detroit in 2017. I was there for that summit, and we sort of started a little bit of this conversation. But I feel like the opportunity that we have now is a new one. In spite of some of the headlines, there's an opportunity for showing up at work and offering our place of business to be a place of personal growth, and accountability is really the linchpin for how we do that. This is the message when I talk with executives, whether business owners, people managers, whether it's their first time running a team, they've just got promoted from engineering or sales or whatever, all the way up to CEOs of Fortune 10 companies. We have the same conversation, which is that the difficulty around the people side of the job, to the degree that you feel like it's uncomfortable, it's awkward, it's anxiety producing, those struggles has nothing to do with your intelligence, your experience, or your courage. It's just not about that. It's not, you're in the role that you're in because you know how to do something. You probably know how to do a bunch of things. And the people management side of it, those conversations, it's a totally different skill. And it comes from a whole other set of experiences and practice and training that very few of us have ever had any real training around. And even fewer of us have had real mentors of people who did this well, who knew how to give us direct feedback in a way that was also empathic. So my first invitation / request, I would love to get a show of hands if I can we just be okay with that? This has nothing to do with intelligence, experience, and courage. Can we just say that? Like, yes? Okay, cool, thank you. I can't see everybody's video at the same time because the way it crops it, but I saw some hand raises. So, and we're gonna toggle between your own leadership, which is, I'm in the same boat as you, and the people that work for you, the people in your organization. That's the first piece of role modeling that's critical, right? For as long as we perpetuate the idea as leaders that we have the answer to this part of the business, then the people around us will feel like they're supposed to have the answer too. They don't, we don't, it's all good. We can work on it, we can grow, we can learn about ourselves, we can change. The tool that I'm going to introduce today, and then I will unshare my screen in a second, and I'd love to hear from a few people about their experience. The tool we're going to introduce, I'm going to walk you through, is a tool called the Accountability Dial. It's the central tool in the work that we do at Refound. And the idea is to take the anxiety and tension out of difficult conversations. We're going to talk a lot about why they're so anxiety producing and why we kind of tense up. The main focus of our conversation today is how do we shift feedback from intentions, oh, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I know you didn't mean to do that, into a much more productive conversation where we're talking about impacts. Everybody in your organization, almost everybody you've ever worked with, shows up with good intentions. Every once in a while in your career, you'll find somebody who shows up with bad intentions. We know what to do with those people. That's not the problem. The problem is people who have good intentions, AKA all of us, who nevertheless have negative impacts on the people around us. We make life harder, we make life frustrating, we can make things more confusing than they need to be. Welcome to the human race. That's how it works. Let's do something about it. So the idea of the accountability dial is, how do we break up those conversations, make them simpler, add some methodology to it, and focus on impacts. So I'm gonna stop my share for a second, and I'd love to hear from folks. Do you want to stay for the rest of the conversation? If so, what do you want to hear about? What sparked your interest so far, or you have a question about? I don't know if people are unmuted or if you have to unmute yourself. I'll look to Rachel for that.
Yeah, and if you guys want to chime in, I can unmute you. So just wave your hand or send us a chat.
Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hi. When I saw it, I was curious about potential methods and tools for obtaining the feedback.
Okay.
Because like right now we're a small organization. We have about 25 employees, and we do it very informally through a series of scheduled, like we do like coffee out of the office or lunch, and which works pretty well. But then I'm also, I think probably we need some forms of maybe a little bit more formalized feedback that also gives staff members the opportunity to give feedback where they feel comfortable they can give honest feedback, not directly to me.
Right.
So they feel free to give their, in case they're holding back when they're talking directly with me.
Got it. How many people would like more feedback, direct feedback from from the people who report to them? Right. Yeah. So we will definitely address that today, and I'm going to show you how to use this tool to do that. We're going to talk about a really sort of core psychological assumption that we need to question first. So after we get through some of the presentation here, that'll be the first topic we'll go to, Mike. Okay, is how do we use this tool and this methodology to unpack that problem a little bit more? Thanks for that.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Cheryl's smiling, so she's got something on her mind. I wasn't volunteering. Okay, so if there's and feel free to chime in. And as I said to Rachel, like, I love talking, but I love being interrupted even more with the things that are interesting to you. And if there's something that sparks your curiosity as we go through here, just say, hey, Jonathan, stop. I got a question. I'm forming it in my mind. Give me a moment. I know in this format, that can be difficult. So let's go back here for a second. So the main thrust of our work, and I think this is very problematic these days, is what we see in most company cultures that we're helping with is people managers are tending to lower their standards. They're tending to give up on some pretty basic, actually, standards of professionalism, because they feel like, well, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be nice. I'm supposed to be warm. I'm supposed to be, all these kinds of things. And to me, that's exactly the wrong approach. If you want to create a high performance culture and a human one, it's not about lowering your standards. It's about learning how to articulate them in a way that inspires people. That's the really hard part, right? It's not about forgiving and overlooking and letting people, no, you don't have to respond to emails here. You don't have to do high quality work. It's all good, right? Nobody wants to work in a place like that. We want to work in a high accountability place, but that means we need to be challenged. So that's not about lowering our standards. It's about articulating, hey, here's the way we do it here. And so the first question that I would ask you is, to what degree are those expectations not clear enough, both organizationally and on an individual team? Where there isn't, and I would suspect / guarantee there is room for improvement from the perspective, maybe not from your perspective. And this is where a little bit of that us versus them gap comes in. But from the employee's perspective, from the team's perspective, it's not clear to them what excellence looks like specifically, right? 10:32 on a Tuesday, I got an email from a customer. I responded in this way. Was that excellent or not? I don't know. I don't have enough insight from my manager or from the organization, I don't actually know where I stand relative to that standard. So the first and most important thing is that we articulate, well, what do we mean by excellence? And it has to go beyond the company values. It has to go beyond the mission. It has to go beyond the top level KPIs or OKRs. That's all the structure. Those are all the bones, right? We're talking about the flesh. We're talking about what happened, what did you say, how did they respond, what was the result? We need to get much more granular and specific, both in ourselves as leaders, but in training our people managers across the organization. People need much more information than they're getting right now about what excellence looks like. What most people managers do now,
Jonathan?
yeah, please.
And you don't have to speak to that right now, but just as you think about this, one challenge that I have encountered, it's less difficult for me when there's a formal employee-employer, a manager-managee relationship. I'd be interested in, as we go through this discussion, how do you work that from more a peer-to-peer perspective when a colleague has let someone down and you don't have a management responsibility over that person? What are some nuggets that might be appropriate and helpful in that context? So just to plant that seed.
Yeah. So I'm going to plant I'm going to co-plant that seed with you right now. We're going to come back to that as our second topic. And It comes down to permission. So the word that I want to, but it comes down to permission. So there's an implied agreement, manager, direct report, that feedback and accountability is part of it. It's not necessarily there between peers, so we're going to build it. So we'll come back to that one. Thanks. And it was Patrick, is that right? Okay, thanks, Patrick. So mostly what we do as people managers and leaders, and we don't realize we're doing this, we're giving answers and we're solving problems. It's not actually feedback. I don't actually learn how to change, right? If anybody here is well, some of you, I can tell from some gray hair, some of you are old enough, maybe any of you who are ever musicians, this concept of feedback, right? If you have a microphone and a speaker and an instrument, when you get feedback, it's a loud screeching noise in your ear, but it doesn't tell you exactly what you need to change, right? It might be the microphone, the gain's too high. It might be the speaker space, and you've got to figure it out. You have to do something. All it is a piece of information. Hey, something's not right in the system. Then you, as the user, you have to figure out, well, what do I need to change? What do I do with that feedback? So if the speaker and the microphone and the instrument could tell you exactly what they needed, you don't need, who needs the person? You don't need the person in that situation. You don't need any creative thinking. You don't need any constructive innovation. You don't need any of those things. Feedback most of the time, and if you peel back the onion, if you could be a fly on the wall of the way most of your managers giving feedback, it's some version of do it this way, don't do it that way. It's not actually feedback. I can't learn from do it this way, don't do it that way. Well, why? What was it about the way that I did it that was missing? How would you have done it if you were in my position? Show me. I need to see it. And so what ends up happening, and this is not manager's intention, but it is the impact, is that people feel micromanaged. They feel like, well, my ideas don't matter. In the end, I just have to do what I'm told. Ultimately, that's my job. And it doesn't have to be that way, but that's the perception. And the lower you are in an organizational structure, even if that's a pseudo flat structure, the more actual authority, the less actual authority you have, the more likely it is you're going to feel like you're being micromanaged, even that it is not the intention of the people who are managing you. And it's not the stated value of the organization. That's the net result. That's what it feels like. And if you get honest feedback from employees, that's what they tell you. This is what we do at Refound every day, irrespective of industry, irrespective of stage of company, size of company. It's the same everywhere. Employees feel like I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not valued. Period, full stop. So we got to do something, right? We can't rely on the company values to change that. It won't work. It's not strong enough medicine. Let's be a little more specific about what we mean by micromanagement. And I do mean it as an addiction. It's answering questions that could be answered with effort, right? Someone says, hey, do you know? We don't actually turn the problem back to our employees. Oh, go this, or you should do that. So we solve it right there for them, right? we approve work that has no new or risky elements in it as managers. Instead of like, wait, why couldn't you approve this on your own? Like, why are you coming to me, right? But these are these cover your ass cycles that are really subtle, and it's very, it even looks like collaboration sometimes, but it's actually a way to avoid self-ownership. The constant check-ins, hey, where are we on this project, right? Like if I'm a manager and I have somebody who has a Wednesday deadline on something and it's Monday and they know that they're not gonna get that, my expectation is they're gonna communicate, hey, I know it's a couple days away, but I'm worried. I think this deadline might slip. Can you help, right? That shouldn't be my job as a manager. That should be the employee's job or the peer's job to say, hey, I wanna get out ahead of this, right? But so if you're a manager, and every manager has different styles, if you find you're constantly checking in on people because you suspect, I think it's behind, I don't think they're gonna get there, you're actually doing their job, right? It's a form of micromanagement. Depending upon the physical environment that your team works in, oftentimes we hear the constant drive by physical interruptions, right? I can't get any creative or strategic work done because I'm constantly being tapped on the shoulder, whether that's actually or digitally in Slack or messaging or whatever. Those interruptions, we know this, right? The data is in, the neurobiology of that, it's very costly, the task switching, but yet we watch it happen all day long. We have to take proactive steps to do that. Sitting in on meetings that other people should be running, right? We say, hey, I really trust you. I know you really know your stuff. Why are we in that meeting? Why are we sitting there, right? We're only sitting there because of our own fear that we haven't worked out, right? So that, again, that control, right? Ultimately, micromanagement is about control. It's a fear of, well, if I don't sit in, it's not going to go the way I want it to, or my position is not going to be advocated for, or whatever, right? That's the type of feedback that we have to be surfacing. Otherwise, we default to control. People managers ends up being a venting space, right? Instead of saying, hey, I appreciate that you feel safe to, come and talk to me about this problem. I feel like you need to go talk to them. I don't actually want to be a venting space. I don't think that's productive. I'm willing to hear you out once. I get it. That's helpful, but I don't want to keep having that conversation because I don't think that's productive for you, and I don't think it's productive for them. So turning people back, right? But oftentimes we will have managers who actually get a lot of political capital in an organization because they're the office that everybody goes, oh, well, I can just always talk to Mike. He always listens. Is that a good thing? Are we going to question that assumption, or we just say, oh, well, that's always good that everybody's going to talk to Mike, right? Like maybe Mike is doing a whole bunch of people's work for them, and Mike isn't actually doing the work that Mike should be doing, right? And then we have infinite opportunities in the modern world to micromanage, not just at work, right? But how many times do we need to check our bank account, right? We probably don't need to check it 27 times a day, but we have the technology, right? We can do that. And, we're struggling as a society right now with like, well, how much checking do we need? How many notifications, how many badges? I think the answer we could all agree is less. How much less? But it's the same in work. How many Slack messages do you need? How many emails do you need? How much information do you need in order to do your job well as a people leader? If you see yourself as a coach, way less. You need fewer instances of the same information and more conversations. So I'm going to unshare my screen again for a second. From that list, I know I just sort of took it away. Does anybody want to kind of self-disclose? What's your form of micromanagement? Which one of those do you tend to default to from that list, or maybe one that wasn't on that list? Yeah, Mike. Oh,
there we go.
There we go.
I guess if I had one, it would be after I've talked to someone about like a task or an assignment they're doing, feeling the need to check back in with them to see how it's going. And I guess part of that where I struggle is it's like when I see myself in that same role, like if I would receive like an occasional update on like progress or a question, it would kind of make me feel better to know that they are making progress, so I don't get hit with at the last minute, oh, I'm not going to get this done.
Right.
And so I don't know if that's a trust issue or if that's just from experience having that happen. I don't know, but that'd probably be one.
Yeah, so I think we'll try to address some of these as we go. So at first, it's in one way, there's multiple things, but it's an expectations issue. So the conversation that I want you to have with the team, whether it's a new person coming on, I want you to have a reset conversation. Hey, I don't know if I've ever fully articulated this, but when it comes to deadlines and tasks, this is my expectation. My expectation is that if the project is on your task list, it's your job to be proactive to the people that you know are relying on that to keep them updated on progress. And I would put that under the bucket of this is how we do it here, right? And get their buy-in at the community standard, right? And that should be true for now. And I would ask them, say, does that fit for you, right? Is that a reasonable expectation? Have that conversation with them so that they're all bought in before it's like an isolated incident. Because then you have something to give feedback against. Hey, remember we had that conversation around, this is one of those instances where it would have been, the right thing to do was to let Melissa know that you were going to run late. Can you see how that's connected to that expectation, right? Those are the specific examples that people need. Okay. Inside of that, when we get to the accountability dial, I'm going to show you some specific interventions that you can use along those lines. Other themes that you feel like are that spoke to you in a little bit of painful way, maybe?
We got one via chat. So checking in on someone who says they're going to do it, especially if they sometimes miss commitments. Yep. So that one sounds similar.
Yep.
I think I fall victim to the first one of just jumping to solve the challenge that someone brings. It's so tempting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times so many of us are people pleasers. You want to help. You have to be very mindful to take a step back and not just try and jump in and solve it.
And I want to come back to that word. There's another tendency to jump in and fix everything because it usually takes less time immediately, right? It's a short-term fix. It's actually a little kind of dopamine hit, right? It's like, because everybody on this call, we like being useful, right? We like being productive. We're really hard workers. So it feels good in the moment. It's not effective as a long-term people management strategy, but it's very deceiving in the moment. It feels good. We feel like we were helpful. And I love the word, Rachel, that you brought in, mindfulness, because these ideas around mindfulness and related ideas, they can often be very abstract. It's a very specific application of mindfulness to the workplace because you actually have to stop in the moment, and it's a practice, right? It's a muscle that you have to go like, oh, I so want to jump in right now, but I know that's not the right thing for this person. That's a workout, right? That's a mindfulness workout that all of us, everybody in this call, I'm not exempting myself, as leaders, that's the journey, is like, this is not the moment to solve this for them. This is the moment to say, I could jump in here. I know I could jump in here. I don't think that's actually supportive of your growth. Let's see how you do, where you go with it. Maybe stop by this afternoon. It's a little micro coaching cycle, right? Less work from you, more holding the space, if you think about that. Okay. Anything else before we keep going here? Okay. So, whoops. Now I'm in trouble. I've got to go back to, sorry, I lost my video here. I got to go back to my screen. This is a little bit less glamorous to show you these slides in PowerPoint, but it's going to be easier for me to go back and forth. I hope you can indulge me. So this is what we just started talking about. So can everybody see this? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when we're always available, we're always giving it answers and advice freely, we actually disempower people because we remove the most important part of the equation, which is personal growth oxygen, right? If you have a coach, if you think about your financial goals, your fitness goals, your relationship goals, work that you've done in a marriage or with your kids, the way we grow as human beings, we need space. When we have somebody in our face telling us to grow, telling us to change, telling us we need to do something differently, we don't function very well. We need room. We need room to reflect. You know what? That feedback was a little bit hard to hear. I agree with it. I don't like the way they said it, but it's true what they're saying. That is something that I do. We need that space. We need that moment to be a little self-reflective. But if we're constantly in the space with our employees, with our peers, with people more senior, if we don't give them space to reflect, right, we miss out on that. That's when, there's a lot of, fancy talk about psychological safety. It's really simple. If you leave room for people to consider your feedback, it'll be safe. If you don't leave room, it won't be. It's really simple. And what happens is we let the conversation be about intentions. Oh, sorry, oops. Anybody ever heard oops, I'm sorry, that'll never happen again? Right? That's worldwide money back, 100% guarantee that it will. There was no learning, right? There was no space. Nobody said like, well, why did that happen? What step did I miss? What conversation with that person did I need to have? What step in our process is broken? There was no critical thinking. So whenever we say, oops, I'm sorry, that'll never happen again, we've blown it. We've completely blown the opportunity. Now, if you say, oops, I'm sorry, I need to think about what happened so that I can make sure that it doesn't. Okay, now we're talking, right? Now we're talking now we're in the land of ownership. Okay, so cold turkey, terrible strategy. New Year's resolutions don't work. We all know this by now, even though we sometimes fall prey to it. We have to bite-size our way to this new form of accountability. How do we challenge people? How do we give them the accountability that they want? When you interview employees, they want accountability, they want autonomy, they want coaching, they want whatever the language is that fits your culture. How do we do it? Through challenging in a human way instead of coddling in a fake, nice way that ultimately harms the organization. So we're talking about the accountability dial. I created this because I sucked at it. I didn't create it because I'm the world's perfect person. I was a CEO, frontline people manager. I really struggled with, when do I give feedback? How urgent do I have to give it? I wasn't clued in at all to the degree that my authority as a senior leader or as a CEO or founder, how much my structural authority was impacting the quality of my feedback, irrespective of the words that I was using. So I invented this tool out of my own desperation as a leader. I started sharing it with other leaders. Then it turned into a book and a business and all that. But I know this problem intimately. I work with it every day. I struggle with it every day. Is this the moment to give this feedback? Is this the moment to wait and see how it goes? Should I wait until Monday? The purpose of the accountability dial is to solve two problems. One is how do we not miss the moment so we don't give feedback that's too intense too early? How do we just light touch? How do we say just what's needed to spark that personal ownership cycle? That's the first problem that we're going to solve today, or start to solve. And the second is, once we've identified a piece of performance that needs to improve, or an attitude, or whatever it is, how do we create a boundary that's firm but fair? Hey, that's not how we do it here. So let's take Mike's example. Somebody we're in a feedback conversation with, we've set the expectation. Let's say we've done that work and they still aren't doing those things. Hey, at some point, that's got to change, or you can't be on this team. I don't care how talented you are. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care if you're the boss's nephew. You can't be on this team if you can't play nice with others. That's not how we do it here, right? That's the modern workplace. So how do we set boundaries and help people author their own boundaries, ideally, so that they don't, so it doesn't become this like squishy, weird thing. Well, everybody knows this about Tim, but we've been talking about it for 15 months and nothing changes. It's not okay. And it's not okay for Tim. It's not okay for you. It's not okay for the team. Everybody's losing. How do we intervene? How do we create a boundary that's firm but fair? Okay. So I didn't mean to take a half an hour to get there. I hope this is helpful. The accountability dial is a 5-step process. There's a lot of text here. You're going to get this deck. You can zoom it in. There's a bunch of stuff on this in the book. The idea is break it up into 5 steps. The mention is that, hey, here's something that I noticed. I don't know what to make of it. I don't have a conclusion. I don't have some grand theory of the universe, but here's what I noticed. What do you think? The second step in the accountability dial is, hey, I've seen this a couple of times. It seems like there's a pattern. I'd love for you to do some more thinking about it. That's the second step in the accountability dial. The third step is, hey, we've been in a conversation about this, but we're still talking about intentions. Let's talk about impacts. Hey, when you're struggling with keeping your teammates, abreast of changes, how's that impact? How's that making life? I know that's not your intention to make life harder or more difficult for them, but what's the impact? And having people inventory the impacts. We're very good at apologizing mostly. We're very good at sort of covering our tracks. We're not very good at owning how we impact other people. So a little bit of a flaw in our sort of human DNA at this point in our evolution. We're working on it, right? And then the boundary, hey, what's reasonable? I'll ask you, this is how to understand the boundary, and we'll come back to it. If you think about right now, I want you to think about somebody on your team, and Mike has an example, Patrick's got maybe one, whoever you are, you've got an example of somebody on your team who's not showing up with their best self. There's something about the way they're showing up that's not good enough. And if I ask you this question, would it be okay with you if they show up that way in your organization for the next 10 years? No, right? You're not okay with that. How about for the next 5 years? No. How about for the next year? Still no. How about for the next 90 days? See what happened? A couple of right? That's a boundary. That's the honest boundary. You know what? As long as I saw incremental progress against this, I could live with it for 60 to 90 days, but not more than that. That's the boundary that has to be articulated. That's how you create a high accountability culture, is you get that what is true for every single person on this call. It's not, I don't want to live this for 10 years, but if we're not conscious about the boundary, we end up living with it for 10 years. Okay, that's the boundary. And then the limit is when you feel like you've done everything. Hey, we set the expectation, we gave some real-time feedback, we had one-on-one conversations about this. You've owned that, hey, this is something that you need to work on. We've given every possibility. Now we're at the limit. Like there's no more coaching. It doesn't mean you're fired. We're going to come back to that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're fired, but it means, hey, we don't know what else to do. What are we missing here? And there can be a very open-hearted, I have had several of these in my career. I've coached many people through them. There can be moments in your culture where somebody you feel like they're not going to make it. They're not going to change. They're not going to be part of a high accountability team. But when faced with a limit, they change. It won't always happen, but that's a necessary ingredient for not only for that person, because everybody else on the team is watching. How were they managed out? Were they managed out? Did they get a chance? Did they get the feedback? So it's not so much about that person as it is about the organization. We've all been on teams where someone's all of a sudden, oh yeah, Mike's not here tomorrow. Well, what happened, right? Like, what were those conversations about? Well, I think leadership is a little bit out to lunch. I know Mike had those things, but was he really given a chance to kind of fix that? So there's a very important part of the culture and morale is how do we manage those conversations at the end? So we're going to run quickly through some examples and then we'll go to conversation. So the mention, it's like 5 seconds. It's a short question or an observation that you've had, or even you had a hunch about. Right, here's a couple of examples. Hey, I noticed a few typos in that proposal draft. Do we have a process for catching those? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But it's something that I noticed and I wasn't going to let it go. I'm going to get out there early so that before it becomes a problem, if it is going to be one, right? Hey, and for positive feedback, we're going to talk about peer-to-peer. We're going to talk about up the organization. But hey, that was a great email you sent to the customer just now. I love how specific you were in responding to her complaint. It really felt like you cared about her in that interaction. For praise, don't just tell me good job. Tell me how. What specifically did I do that was good? And what impact did it have? Right? We talked about, people coming to you for approvals on things that they shouldn't ask for approvals on, right? Hey, that seems like something you could approve on your own, no? Maybe they don't know that. Maybe somebody else told them wrong information. Hey, you should go get approval from Rachel about that. Maybe that's wrong. But if you don't ask, you'll never find out. right? They'll just go do whatever they think they're supposed to do. And these cycles will perpetuate in the organization. Or, hey, you seemed annoyed at this morning's sales stand up, is everything okay? Using feedback, the mention, it's a diagnostic tool. It's not to punish or shame or point out or nitpick or micromanage. It's, hey, here's something that I noticed. Could be something, could be nothing. Let's talk about it. That's a high accountability culture that starts early. That's the solution to the problem we have of managers waiting way too long. And then we give feedback, and the person on the receiving end of that feedback is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what happened on Wednesday last week. I have 17 million emails that have gone through my inbox between now and then. I don't remember the context. I don't remember the nuance. I don't really remember what that person said. Doesn't necessarily have to be real time, like right in that moment, but same day, right? We call that near time at Refound. Can it be near time? So that's the mention. Again, that's that idea of psychological safety. Before I'm really frustrated, but I'm like, if that's that could be a problem, naming it, getting out ahead of it. The next step in the dial is what we call the invitation. As I said before, we're very good at seeing patterns in other people. Oh, Rajiv, he always does that, right? Like Rajiv doesn't know that. We know that about Rajiv. He may know it conceptually, but he doesn't know that it's having the impact that it's having on the people around him. And if people gave him feedback and said, hey, Rajiv, I don't know if you realize, but it's actually having some impacts on the people around you. Most people are really conscientious. Most people are like, oh my Lord, I had no idea. That wasn't what I wanted. Hey, I get that wasn't what you wanted, but that's the impact. Let's talk about it. What steps can you take? What specific steps? So helping people, that's what coaches do, right? If you're a bicyclist or a yoga fan or a weightlifter or a cross trainer, your expectation is your coach is going to point out to you when if your knees are splayed out and you're going to injure yourself, right? Your expectation is they're going to tell you what you're doing wrong before you blow out your knee, right? Not after, oh yeah, sorry about that. I noticed you've been doing that for the last 3 months. Thanks a lot. Right? That's not what we want from our coaches. We want, hey, you're off a bit. What's that about? Right? Hopefully they do it in a friendly way and an open-hearted way. But it's you want to give people the information in as real time as possible so they can get traction on that thing and be like, wow, I actually didn't realize, and oftentimes it's not like, oh, you showed up late 3 days in a row. That's a really obvious pattern, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, you showed up a little late the other day. You seemed a little disengaged in the team meeting, and I don't know. There's something about I don't know what's going on, right? It's often not. We're not so linear as people, oftentimes, especially in an office environment, right? We're not so linear. So being able to stitch together, even though you don't have the data, hey, maybe I'm overreading this. Maybe it's nothing, but isn't it better that I say something rather than pretend it's not happening? That's our role as managers. We think of ourselves as coaches. So if we pull those examples forward, hey, I saw a few typos in the memo to the sales team as well. I'm worried this might be a bigger theme. Sorry, there's a typo there. There might be a bigger theme. Can you stop by so we can both try to understand what's happening here? Right? Hey, that thing that I mentioned in the hallway, it was not nothing. It's bigger than nothing. It doesn't mean you're fired. It doesn't mean you're on probation. It doesn't mean I'm madder than hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. It means, hey, there's something, it's still going on. Let's talk about it. Again, on the positive side, hey, you've been on a roll with new customer outreach. I'd love to learn more about your approach. Really? Thanks, boss. Anybody here suffer from too much praise in their life? I promise you, your employees are not suffering from too much praise. They might be suffering from too much generic praise, but they're not suffering from too much specific praise. Hey, that thing that you did over there with that person on that day, that was friggin' awesome. And here's why. That's the praise that I want. And if you do that, well, then I'll hear you when you give me feedback about the thing that I didn't do well. But if you don't give me that other stuff, I'm not listening. The conversation is that third step in the accountability dial. That's like so the first two are kind of more of those hallway moments, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes, right? If it turns into a really wonderful conversation in the hallway that's really productive, fine. I'm not going to say don't do that, but the conversation is, hey, let's take 15 minutes, or hey, we've got your one-on-one coming up this week. Let's block out some time to really try to dig into this theme. Yeah, I really appreciate you hearing me that that's something that is worth thinking about. Let's stretch out a little bit. Like these things are difficult, right? I've got things in my life that I've been struggling with for 25 years. It's not my expectation that you're going to fix this in 5 minutes. That's not reasonable, and I'm a reasonable person. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about why might that be happening? What assumptions are you making about your role? Whatever, right? Let's have a conversation about that. In the absence of that, what you'll get are excuses, deflections. Well, Mike told me to do this, or blah, blah, blah. You'll get blaming the system, or you'll get victimhood, right? If you don't open up space for ownership, you'll get victimhood. That's just the way it goes. That's life. The last two steps in the accountability dial are what we call the boundary and the limit. That's like, hey, we're in this conversation, and ideally we ask this person, hey, so I appreciate you, being, taking ownership, that it's hard for you when this is one that I had with a colleague, years ago, really smart, incredible person. But when they would go into meetings with our other team, with our sort of co-team that we were cross-functional with, our position wouldn't be, she had a really hard time advocating for our position. And it was a problem, right? And I said, look, I need to be able to let go. I can't be in those meetings. I need you to advocate for that position. What's it like? And I really appreciate you owning, hey, this is hard for you. And there were reasons. Some of them were around gender. There was a bunch of stuff that was in the room, but she was on top of it. She said, hey, I really want to get better at that. I see that that's a key part of my growth as a leader. I said, awesome. What's a good boundary, right? Like, how can I support you so that it's just, what would be reasonable to tackle this? Does it feel like, in the next week that you're going to change this? And she's like, well, that feels really fast. And I was like, yeah, I agree. That feels way too fast. What about over the next year? Do you feel like, I was like, well, I would like to think that in a year, I'm going to be like totally different. Okay, great. So you tell me something between a week and a year, what's a good frame? Then let's create a plan together for how what are the steps you're going to take? And what are the agreements that I can make to support you in doing that? Right? Ideally, that person is authoring that program, and you're there to support and coach. It won't always be that way. You may have to author the boundary sometimes, but start with questions. Start with, hey, what would it look like for you? You want to change this? Like, I can't change this for you. I can support you. I can coach. I can cheer you on. I can pick you up when you fall down, but I can't actually make the change. Only you can do that. So have them author it, and then limit. And again, this is a place where I would need to know more about your organization of if you have a HR, if there's a written violation or warning, or if there's a PIP program, that gets into more sort of the custom work that we do of how do you weave in the boundary and the limit relative to existing procedures and policies. I don't know enough about your organization to answer that today, but that's a question that needs to be answered. I'll just put this up and then we'll just talk. This is what we do when we don't do out-of-the-box training solutions. We take the ideas in the book, we learn about your culture, we do discovery. If this is something that you're interested in, just send us a note to hello@refound.com and mention that you came from Fishbowl. We'll have a conversation, we'll talk about it. That's enough of slide PowerPoint. So before we go further, I want to come back to Mike's original question around, and we'll get to as many questions as we can in the next 15 minutes. If we don't, please also send that question to hello@refound.com. I'll try to answer it. I probably won't get to it today, but I'll try to answer it early next week if I can. So Mike, the first thing is I really like the impulse to say, hey, it might be difficult for people to give that feedback to their boss in person. I think that's real, right? That's honest, that's real. And I think it goes to something that it's part of our flawed thinking as managers that I think you're solving for the right way. So what is a mechanism? And so what I would say, whatever the structure you put in place, I would use the mention to say, hey, so we have this new process in place where you can give feedback, and it's actually, that's our expectation. Our expectation is that our leaders are imperfect. and they mess things up and they say things the wrong way. So we know that, but we need your help so we can help ourselves. That's a form of the mention, right? So now if you introduce this process and you don't get any responses, now you go to the invitation. Hey, so we introduced this process. We feel like we listened, but we're still not getting feedback through this mechanism. We'd love to know why. Not tell us what the feedback is, but we need, that's our expectation, is that you're going to tell us why is it. We get that it's hard. We've all worked for other people. We know that it's hard, but why is it hard here? Let's get more specific, right? And so you use the steps in the accountability dial for how to do that. My one word of advice, if you want to change as a leader, pick the thing that you know, and maybe I'll ask somebody this. If there's something that you know that you do that isn't your best, okay? Does everybody know, does everybody have a thing? I'm not going to call on you for this. Does everybody know their thing that they do that isn't their best self relative to feedback and accountability? Okay. So I want you to start we're going into Q4. Make this your Q4 self-development project. Start with a new assumption. Rather than assuming that it's something that you do and it probably has an impact on your team, I want you to start with the assumption that it's something that you definitely do. You do it all the time, and it's 50 times worse than you think it is. That's how you grow as a leader in my book. You don't make an assumption it's probably okay. You make an assumption it's definitely not okay, and I'm having a hugely outsized impact on my team. Now, take that thing and bring it to your coach or your mentor or your peer group. That's your development opportunity as a leader. What's the worst case scenario? You were wrong and it's only 10 times worse than you think it is, right? You've only things to gain. And one of the things that I say to leaders all the time, you may have personal experience with this, they watch how you stir your coffee. They watch how you park your car. They watch how you talk to people in the hallways. They're asking, I was working with a leader this morning who she would self-describe. She's like, I just don't have like a kind, warm, smiley visage. It's just not me, right? But it has an impact on her team, right? So she's proactively working, like, what can she do to counteract that, right? She knows this about herself, right? So that's how we change, is accepting that if they watch how we stir our coffee, then if we make a change in the way we show up, well, they're going to be watching that too, right? So use it to your advantage. Don't use it to be paranoid. Oh my Lord, they're watching how I stir my coffee. Hey, they're watching that I asked a question when last time I would have given an answer. Holy cow, the world just changed. Every time I've gone to Rachel with something like this, she's always solved the problem for me, but today she didn't. Do I need to consult the astrological charts? Like something, that was a seismic shift in my life with my manager. Use that to your advantage. So and this is especially true when it comes, if you want more feedback, if you want more, assume that you're the problem. Safe assumption, right? It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you real and human. And then there's work to do, right? There's communication to do around that. So Mike, is that helpful? I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything about that. Was that helpful?
Yeah, no, yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
So Patrick, in terms of the peer-to-peer, I'll just want to start by putting a little bit of salt on what I said before, and then I'll open it up again. So we talked about there's a kind of an implied relationship, manager to direct report. Hey, I might be doing it badly, but I'm supposed to be giving you feedback. I'm supposed to be holding you accountable. With peers, I think oftentimes there's a conversation that has to predate that feedback. And it sounds something like, hey, so Patrick, we're both managers. We're at the same level in the org. I'm sure that you see things on my team that I don't see. I would love to have a relationship where you feel comfortable saying those things to me, and I would feel comfortable saying those things to you. Is that cool? Can we do that for each other? That's what I mean by permission. It's not explicit in most organizations. It could be, but it's often not explicit. So the first thing that I would say is, do I have permission? And if I don't, let me go get it. Now, you might have a voice in your head, well, that should be, well, that's just a given, that people should want that. Yeah, they should, but they don't. So get permission first. And then the accountability dial is, hey, so remember we had that conversation around like, hey, this is awkward. You know, again, I know we're peers, but this was a little frustrating. You know, in the meeting this morning, I feel like we talked about not taking that step until we, did this other thing. And it feels like we're plowing ahead. That's frustrating for me. That's a mention, right? I'm being transparent, being a little bit vulnerable. I'm saying, I'm showing up to the interface of that relationship. So I'll shut up and open it back up. I don't know if that gets us further to the answer to what you're asking, or if you can see how this tool would apply there, but over to you.
No, I think so. There's multiple scenarios that sort of come to mind, and there's never a one size fits all approach. It's sort of general guidelines. So I think the permission is in asking for explicit permission, or sometimes if it's just in passing with someone who, in one of my contexts, it's been a large matrix organization. And so maybe a 1 or 2 time interaction. So I kind of, similar to your limit, and engaging, I kind of do a cost benefit analysis. Is it worth saying something or not? And that sometimes also informs, how much of a limb I'll go out and ask for, kind of give you some feedback or not, or sometimes I just let it go depending on that analysis.
Right. So for your benefit, but also for everybody's, I love specifics. So if there's a specific one of those scenarios that you're thinking about and you want to work it through right now, I would be happy to do that.
Well, I mean, I can think of one where it is a context where a manager of a group was not responsive for multiple emails for multiple weeks. I finally escalated it to their manager at a director level because I wasn't getting a response on that. And I expressed benefit of the doubt in there. I said, I'm not sure if I've missed a communication or something here. But we've had multiple, and we had the whole thread there, and we're a matrix virtual organization in that context. And I said, would appreciate any guidance or escalation. And then, an hour later I had a response. So we're working on it. So basically the employee just wasn't fulfilling their responsibilities from my perspective.
Right.
The response was, well, it just fell through the cracks. And, I kind of rolled my eyes and said, well, it fell through the cracks 4 times. And, how many emails over several weeks, I didn't buy it, but I just let it go because I didn't want to bristle feathers there. But to your point, it's been an ongoing theme and pattern. So there's part of me that says, okay, is there the psychological safety within that group to go and raise it with this individual or what? So.
Yeah. So one thing that I might float is there an opportunity, again, I don't know the people, I don't know the context, but is there an opportunity to go to that person or to that manager and say, look, I really appreciate that it's getting solved, but that's really uncomfortable for me. Like, I don't want to escalate. Like, I feel like that's not a good way for us to work together. So I just wanted to say, like, I don't like doing that. That's a mention, right? I don't like doing that. That puts me in a really awkward position. Can you see how that's hard for me, right? Like, get them to start to see their impact.
And I think the right answer to that is yes. And in hindsight, that's what I should have, would have, could have done. I sort of made the mental calculation at that point. Here's the quick and easy way, given the other stuff on my plate, let's just get it solved. And didn't really feel like investing the time in that particular context there. So
totally.
And I think the answer is yes, of course.
So I get it. I understand. Been there. Everybody, like, but that's the moment. Is that we make the mental calculation. Is it worth it? And it's not that you have to do it. I'm not saying, I just want to make sure I'm not saying that the calculation is always go and do it.
Right.
But it's more often than we do.
Right. I agree.
And then the last thing that I would say is the next opportunity that you have to do that, track the outcome. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes with clients, I'll have people do like, I like low tech. I'm a high tech guy, but I like low tech solutions, plus minus result. Here was an opportunity. Here I did it. I made the calculation to intervene, or I made the calculation to not intervene. Third column, what was the result?
Mm-hmm.
If we track it and we measure it, much more likely to see the benefit. They're like, wait, you know what? I thought that was going to turn into like a 3-hour conversation that went nowhere, but it was a half an hour conversation, but it actually changed something.
Right.
Write it down. Right. We track that, put it in you guys, I know journaling is a okay thing in the Small Giants community. It's a great thing to keep track of in a journal. I did it. And also, hey, I didn't do it. I skipped it. I decided, and then it's like, what's the result? Right. Okay.
Great.
Got a couple more minutes maybe for one more sort of comment or question. I see. Go ahead.
We had a comment come in from Diana. She said, it seems like sometimes it's appropriate to shift responsibilities or put in systems to help support for those things that don't come easily for otherwise successful team members. Do you have a response for that?
Yeah. So I think this is where we have to strike the balance between systems and growth, right? So I think there's a wisdom in that. I agree that sometimes that's the case. My experience tells me that it's often a solution that we go to too early, is we create a system to try to work around something that actually needs to change, right? And that that's my opinion, that's my worldview. You don't have to agree with it. I'm not mandating that, but my experience tells me that oftentimes let's put a process in place, and we miss the opportunity to help that person grow, and then it resurfaces in some other form. Right. And then we end up chasing the systems tail. Well, let's put a process and like, oh, well, we now have this work plan, but we never actually had the conversation. So I would just be careful. You're right. And be careful if you suspect that, hey, you know what? I think we're doing this to avoid a conversation that we need to have. You probably are. That same thing we said before. If you assume that it might be happening, instead of assuming that it might be happening, assume that it definitely is. And there's a conversation that we're avoiding, and like that. Thank you. My background, I come from an organization that was focused on systems and process, and there's a ton of wisdom in there. It's really important as you grow a business. We all know the pains and the trials and tribulations of system and process, but they're not all powerful, right? They do some things well. They don't do people stuff well. So, and again, it depends on the job, depends on the context. I was visiting advanced manufacturing factory, like, hey, needs to be systems and process, a lot of them, right? And ultimately, this was illuminating for me, frankly. Like, oftentimes I go into these contexts, I'm like, well, does the accountability dial apply here? Is this really what these people need? And I was in one of the most advanced manufacturing facilities on the planet 2 days ago, and I talked to the line managers, and they're like, ultimately it comes down to communication. It comes down to people not seeing the impact of their actions, and people not escalating things in the right way, and people feeling cross communication. So I was like, okay, that's good news for our chances of landing this proposal. But, so thanks for the acknowledgement there, Dan. I appreciate it. Rachel, I think I'll turn it back to you. And
Yeah, I think we probably have time for one more question here.
Oh, okay.
One came in about journaling. So you mentioned journaling. Do you think a manager needs to document every discussion they have with an employee regarding feedback?
No. I think that I'm not like, we have too much documentation. And the question that I often ask, we do a lot of times we're selling in through HR or L&D, and oftentimes in larger organizations, not always. Sometimes through the CEO. But the question that I always ask is, tell me about your PIP process, your formal written process. And they'll describe it to me. I'll say, okay, how many times have you used it where it actually created a real turnaround in a human being? Crickets. Doesn't work, right? Because once we get into documentation, once we've brought HR involved, once I know that my behavior is being tracked in that way, now it starts to influence my behavior. Now I'm going to probably get more defensive. I'm going to probably get more whatever. And I'm going to check off, this may sound abstract, I'm going to check off smaller boxes to demonstrate that I'm making progress, except I'm not doing the work that actually needs to change. Do you know what I'm talking about? I saw a few, like, people get smaller when they're under threat. They're like, but I'm working really hard and right? It's exactly the wrong thing. So the documentation doesn't mean, let me say one other thing. For your own benefit as a leader, You keeping a journal, writing some things down. Hey, I had this conversation with Paul, and here's what I liked about what I said. Here's what I need to go back and fix. By all means. But documentation, be really careful with that. The accountability dial, generally speaking, is for all the conversations before you get to the place of documentation. Now, if somebody's operating a piece of heavy machinery and they're stoned, accountability dial is out the window, right? Like, limit, goodbye. You don't get to work here. Like, maybe there's whatever, there are situations, and depends on the organization, where there is no written warning, right? So up to and including, that was not okay ever, not even once, goodbye. But there's a lot of gray area.
Okay, well that's it for this one. Check out more Fishbowls exclusively for the Small Giants community at smallgiants.org.